He walked into the courtroom with nothing but hope in his eyes. Yet before he could even speak, whispers filled the room. Not about his case, but about his skin, his age, his place in a world stacked against him. A judge smirked, dismissing him before the truth was ever heard. But what unfolded next would shatter every assumption and expose the cruel face of prejudice hiding behind the law itself. Was this just another trial, or the moment justice would finally be forced to listen? Marcus was just 17, a kid with a mind far sharper than most adults ever gave him credit for. While his classmates spent afternoons at the basketball court, Marcus spent his in the library, buried in law books no one thought a teenager should even understand. His dream wasn't about money or fame. It was about proving that justice could belong to everyone, not just those born into privilege. At home, he lived with his grandmother, the woman who had raised him after his parents passed away. She believed in him with every ounce of her being, reminding him daily that education was his weapon in a world that too often judged him by his skin before his words. Marcus had a plan. He wanted to study law, to defend those who couldn't defend themselves. But for now, his world was still simple: late-night reading, school debates, and helping his grandmother with groceries. To anyone looking in, he was just another teenager with quiet dreams. Yet beneath that ordinary routine, an invisible tension always lingered. Teachers underestimated him. Strangers eyed him with suspicion. And now, as he prepared to step foot into a courtroom, not as a defendant, but with a determination few could imagine, he was about to learn just how heavy the weight of prejudice could be. Because what was waiting for him behind those wooden doors wasn't just a test of knowledge, it was a trial of dignity. And the world inside that courtroom was about to decide if they would ever see him for who he really was. The courtroom buzzed with quiet chatter as Marcus stepped inside. To everyone else, it was just another case, another name on the docket. But for Marcus, it was a chance to prove that intelligence and determination could outshine prejudice. He wasn't there as a defendant, though many assumed he was the moment he walked through the door, but as someone who had studied enough law to challenge an injustice most adults wouldn't dare touch. The judge looked up when Marcus entered. His eyebrows lifted, not in recognition, but in disbelief. A smirk tugged at the corner of his mouth. To him, Marcus was just a boy, a black teenager with no business standing in a place reserved for men in suits and ties. The courtroom clerk whispered something under her breath. A few spectators chuckled. Marcus felt the heat of their stares, each one a silent accusation. You don't belong here. But Marcus knew the case inside and out. A friend from his neighborhood had been unfairly targeted, arrested for something he didn't do, accused only because he fit the description. Marcus had read every document, dissected every word, and now, standing before the court, he was ready to fight. Yet before he could even speak, the judge leaned back in his chair and waved a dismissive hand. "This is a court of law, not a classroom debate," he said, his tone dripping with condescension. The gallery laughed softly, as though Marcus's presence was nothing more than a joke. Marcus's heart pounded, but he refused to flinch. He laid his papers on the table, his voice steady even as the walls of doubt closed in. He began outlining the inconsistencies in the arrest report, exposing how the officer's testimony contradicted itself. At first, no one listened, but as his words sharpened, the laughter faded. The air shifted. Still, the judge's smirk never left. He interrupted, cut Marcus off mid-sentence, and turned his arguments into a spectacle. "So you've read a few books, young man? Do you really think that makes you smarter than this court?" Marcus didn't answer. He couldn't, not yet. Instead, he pressed forward, citing cases, quoting rulings, pointing to evidence overlooked by everyone else. With each word, he chipped away at the wall of prejudice surrounding him. But every victory was met with another sneer. Every point he made was drowned by another insult. And just when it seemed the courtroom might begin to take him seriously, the judge leaned forward with a voice cold enough to freeze the room. "Enough. This charade has gone on long enough. Sit down before you embarrass yourself further." Marcus stood frozen, his knuckles white against the wooden table. He had two choices: Obey and disappear into the shadows of silence, or risk everything by pushing forward against a system determined to silence him? The next words out of his mouth would decide not just the outcome of the trial, but whether anyone in that courtroom would ever see him as more than the color of his skin. The silence in the courtroom grew heavy, suffocating. Marcus stood tall, papers trembling slightly in his hands, but his voice carried with a force that no one expected. He laid bare the truth, line by line, flaw by flaw, until even the prosecutor shifted uncomfortably in his seat. The evidence was undeniable, yet the judge's face hardened, his pride clashing with the reality unfolding before him. And then it happened. Slamming his gavel against the bench, the judge's voice cut through the room like a blade. "This is a waste of the court's time. You don't belong here, boy. Sit down or I will hold you in contempt." Gasps rippled across the gallery. Some averted their eyes, others leaned in closer, drawn to the spectacle. Marcus felt his chest tighten. This wasn't just dismissal, it was humiliation, a public attempt to strip him of his dignity. His grandmother's voice echoed in her mind. "Never let them tell you who you are. Show them." And so, instead of retreating, Marcus stepped closer. His words burned now, fueled by every injustice he had seen, every door slammed in his face, every moment the world told him he was less. He raised his voice, not in anger, but in undeniable truth. He recited case law with precision, cited rulings older than the judge himself, and laid down the final piece of evidence that silenced even the harshest whispers. The judge's smirk faltered. For the first time, his authority was shaken, not by another lawyer, but by a teenager he had mocked and tried to silence. But the tension only grew thicker. Because if Marcus was right, the court would be forced to admit its own failures. And in that moment, the question loomed larger than ever. Would justice finally bend toward the truth, or would the system crush him for daring to challenge it? The verdict that day didn't rewrite the system. The judge never admitted fault, never offered Marcus the respect he had earned. But the evidence Marcus uncovered couldn't be buried. His friend walked free, the charges dismissed, not because the court wanted to, but because the truth left them no choice. Marcus left the courtroom with his head high, though the sting of humiliation still burned. He had exposed the bias in plain sight, forced a room that laughed at him to go silent. Yet deep down, he knew this was only one battle in a much larger war. Outside those wooden doors, nothing had changed. Young men who looked like him were still judged before they spoke, still silenced before they could be heard. But something had shifted. In the faces of a few in the gallery, Marcus saw admiration, even hope. His courage had planted a seed, one that would grow far beyond the walls of that courtroom. For Marcus, the fight didn't end there. It was only the beginning. Every insult, every attempt to silence him became fuel for the fire that would drive him toward becoming the lawyer he had always dreamed of being. Not just for himself, but for every voice the system tried to erase. And that's what this story reminds us. Racism doesn't always wear a hood or shout in the streets. Sometimes it hides in robes, in titles, in institutions built to serve justice, but too often failing it. So the question is, whether Marcus proved himself? The real question is, how many more voices like his will it take before justice truly belongs to everyone?